Along the banks of San Francisco are the fading remains of another time. Contrasting the modern metropolis, these were the many docks of San Francisco. In their prime, they were bustling hubs of trade and immigration, and they were just teeming with activity. From the Gold Rush era to the mid-20th century, they welcomed ships worldwide, shaping the city's economy and cultural landscape with their vibrant maritime heritage. These algae-covered pillars, rusting cranes, and dilapidated buildings are part of the city's legacy, yet some see them as monuments to nothing. Either way, this is the story of the lost docks of San Francisco. I'm your host, Ryan Sokash, and you're watching It's History. During the 17th century, San Francisco's shipping industry was non-existent, as the region remained largely untouched by European powers until the late 18th century. Once Europeans arrived, the area's natural harbor and strategic location attracted Spanish explorers and settlers, laying the groundwork for the maritime activity that would follow in the coming centuries. The first landing place on the northeastern tip of the San Francisco Peninsula was a rocky promontory below Telegraph Hill, later known as Clark's Point. This landing point jutted into the San Francisco Bay, not far from the Broadway and Battery Street line. Spanish explorers would typically reach San Francisco by sailing along the Pacific coast of North America, often embarking on expeditions from Mexico or Spanish colonies in the Central and South American continent. They'd navigate the vast oceans using primitive maps, celestial tools, the stars, and knowledge passed down through generations of sailors. Upon reaching the California coast, they would explore and chart the area, searching for potential sites for settlements or trade routes. Spanish colonization between 1700 and 1800 led to establishing the Presidio of San Francisco and Mission Dolores in 1776. Despite its strategic significance, the port served mainly as a stopover for Spanish ships. However, the arrival of Russian and British fur traders in the late 18th century significantly increased maritime activity. Beyond that, early European visitors included the British Raccoon in 1814 and the French frigate Artemis in 1839. The USS St. Louis arrived in 1840 and was the first warship to fly the American flag in the San Francisco Bay. On July 9, 1846, the USS Portsmouth gave a 21-gun salute, and Captain John Montgomery and his detachment rowed ashore and hoisted the American flag on the Mexican flagpole in the small settlement plaza, later renamed Portsmouth Square in honor of the ship. In fact, the earliest development of a port in San Francisco was 2.5 miles east of the Presidio under the Mexican regime, and it began in 1835 as the town of Yerba Buena. Before this time, the port at Montgomery was considered the official port of entry to California. And this was likely the moment that San Francisco's port showed potential as a trading hub. Although its development was still in the early stages, it was on the cusp of a significant transformation. In the 1800s, the port of San Francisco experienced monumental transformation, evolving from a modest outpost into a bustling center. This is when Captain Richardson erected the first abode of a European on a hill overlooking the bay, becoming the first harbor master by appointment of the governor. Then, when California was claimed for the United States on July 7, 1846, Yerba Buena was claimed as well just 2 days later. However, in 1847, the name was changed from Yerba Buena to San Francisco, so that, quote, the town may have the advantage of the name given on the public map. The early city was built on the west side of Yerba Buena Cove around Portsmouth Square. Almost immediately, General Kearny, acting as governor of California, allowed the municipality of San Francisco to sell so-called wet lots in the tidelands between Clark's Point and Raycon Point in an effort to expand the waterfront and to raise revenues for the city. At the same time, the landowner at the foot of Telegraph Hill, W.S. Clark, built a timber pier, and the location became known as Clark's Point. This was later followed by a substantial dock at a measurement of 750 feet long and 60 feet wide at a depth of 26 feet. The area began to resemble a major port, and the landing was finally fully available to deepwater ships. The California Gold Rush of 1848 brought an unprecedented influx of settlers and fortune seekers, sparking a massive demand for goods and transportation. San Francisco's port, strategically positioned on the Pacific coast, became the gateway to the gold fields, attracting ships from across the globe. In the ensuing years, the state legislature passed bills concerning the sale of water lots and authorized the city to construct wharfs beyond its boundary, and in the process, wharfage rates were set. Accordingly, battles over control of the waterfront, water lots, and docking privileges began. The Great Central Wharf, named after the Central Wharf in Boston, was built in 1849 and is located where Commercial Street is now. By 1851, the Central Wharf had 10 times more business than it could handle. Hence, many new additional wharfs were built in its vicinity, including those at Market, Sacramento, Washington, California, Clay, Jackson, and Pacific Streets. The filling of Yerba Buena Cove and extensive corruption in legislation led to a period during the gold rush when significant portions of the city were built right on top of the water lots. This was not the intention, and it created a terrible mess, as sources describe, quote, reclaiming by hook or crook on pile-driven and rough planking overlay. Because of this, early San Francisco was a kind of wharf city, with planks and sheds frequently subject to devastating fires. Now, I realize that might be hard to imagine from today's perspective, as everything has been permanently reinforced and paved over, but you have to remember that what we see now took many decades to realize. In the mid-19th century, half the early city was built on trembling wharfs, shore scrubs, and sandy hills. Considering the early development's nature, many piers, along with their buildings, actually fell right into the bay. The dilapidation was so bad that by 1857, the waterfront was a jumble of abandoned ships, collapsed wooden buildings, and rickety piers. This is why both businesses and the authorities looked for more solid facilities. As the city boomed, the port expanded rapidly, with wharfs, warehouses, and docks springing up along the waterfront. I'd also point out that San Francisco is becoming a dank industrial city, which the residents openly complained about. Some complained about the smell, whereas others couldn't handle the terrible noise pollution. In fact, as a side note, the latter complaint is still a significant issue in the modern day. Living in a bustling city like San Francisco means being constantly exposed to high and intrusive levels of noise pollution, and this issue is not unique to San Francisco. And I can offer you a comparison here. According to experts, New York City scores only 47 out of 100 on the Serenity Index. This indicates that residents are subject to constant high decibel levels, making it difficult to concentrate or relax after a long day's work. If you're in a similar situation, I have the perfect solution. The new Raycon Everyday Earbuds. Their latest design features attractive noise cancellation, ergonomic design, and multi-point connectivity, allowing seamless connection to two devices simultaneously. These earbuds offer the same superior audio quality as leading brands, but at a fraction of the cost. This has been a great discovery. If I'm away from home and need to do research for a new video, write a script, or just concentrate, their noise-canceling feature makes working on a plane or in a downtown hotel a breeze. Plus, they're incredibly comfortable. Their design allows me to wear them for long periods without any discomfort. Furthermore, they have a great variety of colors to choose from. I love this classic black option. It's sleek and discreet, and they offer fantastic settings, from balanced sound, bass sound, and pure sound. They're ideal for listening to podcasts. Also, its quick charging feature allows you to have them ready in as little as 10 minutes, and the battery lasts an hour and a half. Not to mention, its wireless charging is simply outstanding. So if you're considering renewing your headphones, there's no better time than now. Click the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/itshistory to get 20% off your Raycon purchase plus free shipping. By 1869, the port of San Francisco was further connected inland upon the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, facilitating the movement of goods between the East Coast and the Pacific. However, shipping volume did drop by about 50% on domestic shipping, as freight and people could now simply be loaded into a train wagon. Even so, 2 more wharfs of note projected out into the bay around this time. Near the foot of Taylor Street arose McMahon's Wharf, as well as Meg's Wharf. They had T and L-shaped extensions, the former of which was a landing for wood and charcoal. Not far from there was the merchant's dock, which built and repaired ships at the same time. This dock was located near Kearny and Bay Streets. It was swallowed up when the new location for the seawall was established along the curve which is now the Embarcadero. Merchant's Dock was moved to the foot of Harrison, and the company established floating dry docks at Hunters Point. The North Point Dock on the north side of Telegraph Hill, built in 1853, became the landing site for immigration ships from Italy and France. Then, in 1863, the California Board of State Harbor Commissioners built a seawall on the San Francisco waterfront. The project eliminated the patchwork and jagged lines of the wharf. Ultimately, a 60-foot wide channel in the mudflats was dredged to a depth of 20 feet below the tide level, and huge loads of rocks were placed from watercraft at the center lines of the trench until they stopped sinking and became an evenly graded ridge the whole way at the height of the mean low tide. These rocks became the foundation for the seawall. From there, coffer dams were sunk and forms were constructed inside them while constant pumping occurred. Finally, a mass of concrete 2 feet thick and 10 feet wide was poured over the rocks, and a masonry wall was constructed 7 feet at the base and 9 feet high. The area inside the wall was pumped out and filled with stone, rubble, and trash for extra stability. This type of operation was not unique in San Francisco, as steam-powered machines called patties were also eating away at the dunes and rock hills, especially Telegraph Hill. They were just chopping away, a few blocks west, gathering materials to be used to fill in the city's landmass. Temporary steam train lines carried the earthen fill for dumping onto the mudflats. And this operation really changed the city. Surprisingly, even structures such as the Ferry Building or the Southern Pacific Building at the foot of Market Street were built upon thousands of piles sunk up to 135 feet deep. In the end, over 500 acres of land were filled behind the seawall, thus massively extending the city's footprint, establishing what has now become the foundation of the Embarcadero Historic District, including the bulkhead buildings and piers that extend into the bay. In 1890, the port commissioners began developing a series of switchyards and warehouses on the reclaimed land for the San Francisco Belt Railroad, a line of over 50 miles that connected every berth and every pier with the industrial part of the city and the railways of America. And at least for a time, this is what constituted the trade routes of the Pacific. Railcar ferry transfers on steamers carried railcars to transcontinental systems for a decade or more. Then, in 1912, the Beltline was driven across Market Street in front of the Ferry Building to link the entire commercial waterfront with railways both south and north across the continent. The line was extended north along Jefferson Street through the tunnel to link up with U.S. transport docks at Fort Mason, and then south to the China Basin. This particular infrastructure would stay in place all the way until the 1989 earthquake, when much of the Belt Railroad's right-of-way was removed and replaced with streetcar tracks, which are now used by the San Francisco Municipal Railway. As a side note, the Belt Railroad engine house and sand house still exist and were added to the National Register of Historic Places on February 13, 1986. By the end of the century, the Port of San Francisco had cemented its status as a central global hub, handling vast volumes of trade and immigrants. In other words, San Francisco began playing a pivotal role in shaping the economic and cultural landscape of the American West. With the completion of the Panama Canal in 1914, San Francisco's position as a key Pacific port was only enhanced, as it facilitated much quicker and much more efficient trade routes between the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. Additionally, advancements in shipbuilding and navigation technology during this period increased the capacity of vessels traversing the port, leading to steady growth. This state of affairs would continue until the 1920s. when LA surpassed other coastal settlements in popularity, firmly reducing the Port of San Francisco to a secondary role. For the next few decades, the port lost its market share, and then, when containerization took hold in the 1960s, the Port of San Francisco ceased to be a major terminal altogether. Only a few piers added container handling equipment, but heavy traffic congestion in the area and comparably poor rail access meant the city could accomplish very little. Environmentalists and the soaring cost of real estate in San Francisco also challenged further expansion. So by the 1970s, the Port of San Francisco became a niche player, specializing in dry bulk cargo, ship repair, and ferry services. This was right around when San Francisco port fell into decline, leaving some structures to age gracefully and others to be outright abandoned. Starting at the Golden Gate Bridge and working our way south, we'll find that most of the waterfront has been renovated, is in good condition, and does not feature many abandoned buildings. This area is where we see places like the Fisherman's Ward, Pier 39, the awe-inspiring Ferry Building, the active cruise terminal, or the entire central Embarcadero Piers Historic District. However, you don't need to wander too far beyond these places to see that the other docks of San Francisco are fading fast. Aside from Oracle Park, a stadium built over a previously industrial waterfront, is Mission Bay and the Central Basin. The waterfronts south of this point offer the most rustic presentation of urban decay. For example, Crane Cover Park offers an extreme contrast. Children can swim at a beach in plain sight of a seemingly unused and maybe even abandoned ship launch, rusting barges, and various other industrial buildings. Next, as you continue south along the shore, the city resembles the original town, a patchwork of private docks, condemned buildings, and businesses. This is where we come upon the historic Islas Creek, the largest body of water in the city, covering an area of nearly 5,000 acres and having, at one point, two main branches. From its source in Glen Canyon, the entire creek stretched about 3.5 miles to the San Francisco Bay, and in the past, the mouth was nearly 2 miles wide, providing up to 85% of the drinking water used by San Francisco. However, due to urban development, the watershed of the creek has been reduced by roughly 80%. Many neighborhoods in San Francisco today are standing where this creek once ran. In 2007, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, which manages the city's water, began investigating the possibility of daylighting underground creek portions. I should also point out that if we go as far back as 1871, the area along the creek was known as New Butchertown, where more than 100 slaughterhouses were opened. Since then, the creek's condition deteriorated, literally becoming a dumping place for garbage, sewage, animal waste, and unsold meat products. The condition became so bad that the creek was commonly referred to as Creek by San Franciscans. However, after the 1906 earthquake, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors voted to fill in the creek with earthquake debris, reducing it to its present size. From that time, it served as a docking area for large ocean-going tugs during World War II, and at one point had the largest coconut processing plant on the West Coast. The now abandoned 5-story high crane once transported large amounts of coconuts from ships to the plant as late as 1974, and I'm happy to report that it has been preserved as a historic landmark. Also, in the 1950s, this creek was home to the largest sardine canning industry in the world. Ultimately, the creek's condition gradually improved after a new wastewater treatment plant was constructed in 1970. Today, most of the creek is covered and transformed into a ditch, with most of what flows still originating at Glen Canyon. The new Indian Basin enjoyed a similar history, however these days it's covered in expansive greenery and very beautiful. Hunters Point is a bit further south and was at one time the epicenter of the shrimping industry from 1870 to 1930, when Chinese immigrants began operating most of the shrimp companies in Bayview. By the 1930s, there were at least a dozen shrimping operations in this location. However, in 1939, the U.S. Navy took over the land under eminent domain and established a naval shipyard. Around this time, the health department burned the shacks and docks that many fishermen and their families once called home. However, the change may have been worth it, as this area hosted the first permanent dry dock on the Pacific coast. In 1940, the United States Navy purchased a section of property to develop the San Francisco Naval Shipyard. And finally, we reach the San Francisco International Airport, where there are basically no remains of former docks, as the area has been radically transformed by modern construction. And that's the story of San Francisco's forgotten docks, overlooked, faded relics that once paved the way to greatness. I hope you guys enjoyed that story, and if you did, you can support the channel by subscribing or sharing this video with a friend. Otherwise, I thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, I'm Ryan Socash, signing off.